Hello, Karin. It's so good to see
Hi.
you.
Good to
I
see you
noticed
too.
I was getting everything set up that you actually have kind of a funky mug today, which I love. I'm a fan of handmade things and ceramics, and
I,
yeah,
I had I had not such a nice mug, so I poured my coffee into this one that my son picked out because he has much better taste than I do in all things.
your official interview mug.
That's right.
It's during the. I have a friend that has the smart glasses that are just like glasses with no prescription in them, but you can put them on for your special occasion so that you're taken seriously
That's
with
right.
things that you say. Yeah, that's the warm and comforting mug. Yeah, I love
That's
it.
right.
So thanks for spending some time with me today. It's been a wild, woolly period for all of us these days, and of course, we're speaking before we announce or activate the broadcast of Das Rheingold in 3D. But by the time our interview goes out, our audience will have seen the piece for a second time. Well, or the first time if they're joining us from somewhere else. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and kind of talk to you about your experience, both with Minnesota Opera, but also this production, because there was a lot of really interesting um, challenges and things that we did differently and for the first time in order to make this happen. Um, you are someone who's been with the company at least as long as me, if not longer. I know that I think you were introduced to the company as a chorister and came in singing with Minnesota Opera, which is where we met when I was in the resident program. And then you actually joined the resident artist program and have continued to sing with us for the last years, and it's been just remarkable. So I'm curious, from your perspective as an artist who is such an integral part of this family, like, what is Minnesota? How has the company changed and grown since, and your perception of it since you were introduced to Minnesota Opera, and where it is now, and where do you think it's heading?
So when I started, I got my first, we called it the University of Minnesota, or the Minnesota Opera Scholarship Fund, because a lot of kids from the University of Minnesota would join the chorus for just a little extra money, and also to hear these amazing sing and get some experience on their resumes. So I did that when I was doing my master's, and just kind of getting my toe into, how the business worked. I mean, I saw so many things of, how to behave as a singer, and sometimes how not to behave as a singer. So, just seeing that. And then I was so lucky to become a part of the Young Artist Program after I graduated, and, learning even that much more, and kind of getting, I think as a young artist, you also get so much kind of information of how the industry works, and you can pick the brains of people like Dale and Floyd and Kevin at the time, and kind of get their perception. And also too, right before I started, it was I started 2002, so it was kind of right after the economic crash, and I just remember the company being so proud and happy that they went to 5 shows. It was like a big step to go from that 4 show season to the 5 show season. And then because of 9/11 and the economic fallout of that, having to scale back and seeing, how they approached that, and how they said, okay, these are our circumstances, and how can we make this work? And seeing that from a few different levels. It was 9/11, and then it was the big economic downturn in 2008, when so many companies folded, and Minnesota was in such a strong place. And we kept on thinking, well, when is it going to be Minnesota's turn to have these problems? And it was, instead of a roller coaster, it was just kind of a nice little, slow little bump. And they managed, with the board that we have, they managed, and the ingenuity of all the people behind the scenes, it managed not to be such a crisis for this company. So being used to that and then seeing how other companies sometimes function, I think was a big eye opener when I started going regionally and seeing some companies are literally season to season. They don't know what's going to happen. So
I
I
have worked for
realized
some of
like,
those companies, so I remember that well from being in other places.
yeah. And to not understand as a young artist that what Minnesota had was really special
Yeah,
as far as the support that we have in the community. Um, it's really kind of unlike, I think, a lot of other companies. So we're very lucky in that respect. And to be able to bring in, as a young artist, to be able to bring in so many just world-class singers. Because as a young artist, I think that is where you learn the most, is watching
yeah,
other singers who are at the top of their craft, and then being able to talk to them like,
yeah,
oh, wow, like, how do you do that? And having singers like Greer Grimsley, like really I remember when he came and did Flying Dutchman, and I was a little young artist having no business covering Zenta, but there I was. And he gave master classes to us about, how his approach was. And he took, time out of his schedule to talk with us. And Minnesota facilitated that, and they asked him, and it was just phenomenal. So all those experiences, you know, going through and then being able to come back from time to time after I graduated has just been, it always feels like just coming home, like
yeah,
I'm with my people again.
yeah, yeah. And so you mentioned having covered Senta during Flying Dutchman, but had you sung any Wagner in between that cover and having a chance to come in and work opposite Greer and Denise and Kat and all of your other colleagues as Freia? I mean, like,
No, I had not. I consider Freia my first official role because, like I said, the Zenta, it was really just learning a little bit of the aria to do the pre-show
right? Yeah,
lecture, and there was never any question that I would never go on for the soprano in case they would have flown someone in. They would have never asked me to do it. But so Freia is, I think, officially my first Wagner role, which is a great introduction, and to be around so many people who have had so much experience with Wagner, like Catherine Goldner, Greer Grimsley, Dennis Peterson has done a ton, Julian Close, all these people, and the really neat thing, and I think for me, with that repertoire, it seems more than other repertoire, is that the people who have the experience and have studied with, world-class conductors, that this is their bread and butter, they are so generous with passing down the things that they have learned. I just remember having a really great conversation with Greer Grimsley, and he was talking about how in Wagner, he really relies heavily on alliteration. So, the frohe, fricke, when you're saying something, if there is a repeat in a certain beginning consonant, that you want to kind of emphasize that. And each one gets a little bit stronger and stronger. And he kind of gave some examples. And it was like, oh my gosh, I might not have ever really learned this if he hadn't been there. And it was just kind of like a happenstance conversation. But it
amazing.
was, unless I had, taken a course on Wagner,
Yeah.
it would have taken me years to glean that information.
Yeah. So can you pinpoint what it's like when you are a fully seasoned artist by the time we hit this in 2016? First Wagner role, but you have a lot of experience under your belt. You had a lot of big successes here, but it still sounds like there's something different about approaching your first Wagner role with colleagues that have experience in the genre. and with that type of music. So where was your head as you came into this?
Well, I think for me especially, Freia is such a lovely role. It's not terribly large. So I mean, it's an important role, but it's not a lot of singing, and being at home and having that comfort of, the familiarity and knowing everyone, that was a lot easier for me. But it's still, Wagner is kind of this genre that not a whole lot of people sing.
Yeah.
People become specialists in it, and singing with people who are considered specialists. It was a little intimidating at first, but I have to say, maybe after the second day, because everyone was so down to earth and so friendly and such great colleagues, kind of all that went away. And we just had a lot of fun, honestly, in rehearsals. We laughed so much. Kyle Albertson is probably one of the funniest people I know.
Totally.
And so there was just so much, I think, joy in creating
Yeah.
this piece, and of course, Brian Stauffenbiel, I think set the mood and the tone so well for us because he's such a giving colleague, and he's so interested in the collaborative process that there was never that feeling of, am I doing this right? Which can kind of sometimes overwhelm a singer when they're approaching repertoire like this,
Yeah.
saying, I don't want to get it wrong. But
Yeah.
if you go into the rehearsal not wanting to make any mistakes, that creative process is just completely stifled. And that wasn't the case at all for this Rheingold. It was, I mean, everyone was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, we've been talking a lot at the company about our recognition of the fact that the community, in essence, helps support our work in making stuff up all the time. And it's not always, it's always original. And even though it's sometimes based in work that has existed for a long time, what's happening in that moment, that because we exist for these crazy, beautiful, ephemeral moments where we gather people together and experience something all at the same time. This production was different still. Everybody at this point that's watching our interview has had an opportunity to see the broadcast of Rheingold. But in order for us to fit a production of this scale into the Ordway, we had to drastically rethink how we were going to do that. Orchestra, I think, had 88 players. Our pit, I think, generously, if we're using a healthy dose of Wesson oil, might fit 55 or 56 players down there. So for us to be able to present Rheingold, we had to flip the normal pattern of how that theater space is used. And as a singer going into the Ordway, and you're comfortable with the house, you've sung there a lot, but all of a sudden the conductor, Maestro Christie, isn't in front of you, he's behind you or below you. There are monitor systems to help with that. You're not hearing things the way that you could. I mean, what were all of the challenges that you faced going into that kind of production?
Sure. Well, and if you remember, you have these different playing areas. I think one of the most brilliant things that they came up with was creating these different worlds on stage. So you have where the players normally would be in the pit. That's where the Rhine maidens were, in the really earthy, low area, and then you had this big railing up above where the gods lived, which I thought was so neat, because also Brian Stauffenbiel recycled a lot of set pieces. Yeah. And I remember very specifically that high walkway was from Grapes of Wrath. Yep. And I remember exactly being on that piece of, and remembering that sometimes it kind of moved a little bit, that it wasn't in concrete, it was very sturdy, and I never was afraid that it was gonna, collapse or anything, because that would just never happen. I know the people who built it, they would never let that happen. Yeah. but it swayed just slightly. And if other people were walking, I just remember you had to plan, okay, now, you know, Kyle is going to walk by me. And so I'm just going to very subtly grab the handrail because it just, it's like being on the subway.
Yeah.
It's going to move a little bit. And so you kind of get your subway legs under you.
Yeah.
But that took a little bit of adjustment. One of the things too, I also thought was really smart was that because there were so many singers in front of the orchestra, which means they're in front of the conductor, they had to rely on monitors.
Yeah.
So during the rehearsal process, we would actually move the piano behind them, and Michael Christie would conduct behind them, and they would have to look at a monitor. So that preparation, I think, was really helpful. There's still a lot of adjustment when you get into the theater as far as listening. And, when you're so high up, you can't look down at your conductor. You still have to sing out. And just relying really on visual cues and oral cues. I think we were able to rely a little bit more on listening to the orchestra because we were on the same plane as they were.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was that. I never felt like the getting in sync with the orchestra was ever really that difficult, but you really had to listen more because the sound, you weren't getting the sound towards you. It was a lot of fussing with monitors so that you could hear what was going on because we're so high up and the sound just kind of went out and it didn't necessarily come up to us all the time.
Right. Yeah. And
so there was,
if you're on stage, you've got hard pieces of sets behind you that sort of function like a coral shell, or like if you were to hold a real shell up to your ear on the beach, you kind of get that, you get the reflection of sound. But in this case, everything was projected on a soft surface, so you didn't have any of the bounce that you would normally have with that. So it's interesting to know that you never felt completely covered up, but you also didn't get the same quality of sound back as you were performing as you normally might.
Right. And I think that's where all of the singers really had to rely on their technique because you weren't getting much back and it just went out and you never felt like you could really say, okay, is my balance okay? Is my volume okay? You just had to trust that what you've been doing for years and years and has worked so far for you will work in this moment because it's like singing into a void. It just goes out and you don't have that hard stuff to, kind of check in and see, okay, is everything. And that's, the singers that were there did a phenomenal job of that. They just relied on that years of technique to get them through.
I'm also really glad you mentioned the way that we rehearsed with monitors to sort of set up that paradigm from the very beginning of the rehearsal process. And I don't know why I was kicked back to this moment at the end of this film called Gosford Park. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
No.
It's an upstairs, downstairs, and it was sort of a precursor to
Downton Abbey?
To Downton Abbey, yeah. And one of the servants, towards the very end of the movie, she's talking about, what do you think is the gift of the perfect servant? Or in this case, I think the perfect partner for members of a family, of a team. And she talks about that gift as being the gift of anticipation. And that always struck me as such a really important trait that I think is exhibited by our production teams when we're moving into rehearsal processes like this, that if there is a critical prop or a critical part of your costume or a function of how the performance will be run, they have taken the time to sort of anticipate what will help the artist so that it's not as abrupt as 3 weeks of rehearsal and then walking in and everything is different. But how do we help bridge that gap? Are there other ways with this production that you felt like they really had thought one step ahead in order to make that easier for you all?
And I think that's one of the genius parts of it, is that as a singer, if the production team has done their job, we don't really notice, because they have anticipated what might have gone wrong. They have to sit up at night and go, okay, what would happen if, and we didn't see, as singers, we didn't see that work. It felt fairly seamless. And I know there was so much going on, and I could see Karen Quisenberry and Michael Christie, going around and readjusting the chairs, and they were so busy figuring that out. But it was all kind of behind, the scenes, even us. So that when we got her, it was just like, okay, this works. And I really didn't have any train wrecks or any bumps that, because it was all anticipated, like you said.
Yeah. That's so great. And to get to work with Brian on a project like that too, I think he was a beautiful complement to that team.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't want to keep you on the line for too long, but I do just want to recognize that we're in an election cycle right now. That will have come, part of it will have come to a conclusion by the time our interview goes out. But there is an added layer of sort of awareness and stress that exists in our culture around elections, especially in such a polarized place that our country finds itself in. And the footage, the video footage and the audio footage that we were able to find and put together and then transform into this broadcast of Rheingold actually was captured on the night of the election in 2016. So we were in the highest, most critical, stressful situation in an election cycle that you can be in. And you all were performing the final rehearsal of a piece in a very unusual way with a lot of different challenges. And I'm curious if you have memories about what that was like, and how do you, as an artist, take everything that's going on externally and refocus? How do you bring your game with so much going on that's pulling on you in a different way than usual?
Well, I think every artist does that differently. I remember very specifically Kyle watching as the election numbers were coming in, and you're going from the beginning of the evening and how it kind of shifted, who was leading, and now, oh, this is a big lead, and now and he was following that so closely. And I just remember at the end of the night, he was saying, yeah, I don't know. And I just said, it's whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen. It's kind of out of our hands by now. But there's something for me about the theater, in that I can completely lose myself in this different world. And that for me, I have to kind of compartmentalize. But there's something, I just think, that's like almost this physical change. And even if you're hearing about the election, in the back corridors, in the dressing rooms, as soon as you get to backstage, it's like muscle memory takes over, and that you have a job to do, and your mind just laser focuses on what you need to do. And it's kind of phenomenal to be on stage and not to have to think about any of that. It's like the ultimate, you are in the moment, and this is the only thing that's happening for you in that moment. You're not, I'm not singing or listening to, amazing music while I'm on stage and thinking, oh gosh, what are the numbers? Because that pulls you out of the show.
Yeah.
That would never work.
Those would be thoughts that Freia would have in that moment.
Right. But it's such an amazing experience to be completely in the moment. And that's what I love, I think, more than anything about theater, is that you have no other option but to be fully present. And then you deal with the real world. At least for me, I deal with the real world outside of the theater. But it's this almost magical cocoon where, you don't have to think about life outside of what's going on right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it was very interesting. It was a there was a lot of chatter in the back halls, but at the end of the day, we have I don't even want to say a job. We have a passion that we do, that we
Yeah.
get to do, and you get to be on stage with an amazing orchestra and hear amazing music, and there's nothing better in the world.
Oh, well, Karin, I'm so grateful that you took time to just sort of sit down and walk through some of that with me. I've really loved watching, I loved watching Rheingold come together the first time, but then the fact that it has a bit of a second life has been exciting. And I just want to thank you for everything that you bring to the stage every time you appear with us, because it's always a treat to have you with us. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. I can't wait to see it. You never get to see the show you're in.
I know, that will be exciting. That's very cool. Alrighty, I'll see you later on.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.